This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. And joining me tonight is a former announcer from Polynesian Pro Wrestling that was featured on Tales from the Territories. And of course, famously, the Rocks family was heavily involved in it, as well as Kevin Sullivan, who's a mainstay on this channel. Sonny Ross coming to us from Los Angeles, California. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing well. It's so funny that you mentioned the name Kevin Sullivan. Oh my God, do I have stories about Kevin Sullivan? Um, Anyways, it's delightful to be with you tonight, and I'm. It wasn't just look. It wasn't just Polynesian professional wrestling. Liam Ivia had a relationship with the NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions, so it was really an offshoot of Jim Crockett Promotions, that I worked at.
How did you become involved with it, and how far into the company's existence was it when you actually got involved with the company?
Well, as a kid, I grew up in Minneapolis, and that was Vern Gagne territory. And so we would be very involved as a kid back in those days. That was like, I don't know, 60s, I suppose. Crusher, Bruiser, Vern Gagne, um, Larry Zabisco, all those guys. And so I was living in Hawaii, and I saw that there was an event in Maui, and so I asked my son. I said, let's go to the event." So we went to the event at I'll never forget it, the War Memorial Stadium in Maui, and there was Lars Anderson. I knew Lars from Minnesota, and their announcer didn't show up. And so I was talking. I said, "Hey, Lars, I could do this. I could do it. I mean, this is like easy." So I just kind of winged it, and then from there he says, "Oh my God, you're quite the talent. You need to be working with us." That's how it actually started.
So you had no experience at all in pro wrestling, and even in the kayfabe days, they were willing to take a chance on you because they just needed an announcer.
That's how it started, and yeah, that's how it started. And so from there, I I then had a stage name because it was here. This was a really interesting time in my life. I was in the television business. I was the 6 o'clock anchor on the Financial News Network. So during the week, I'd be the 6 o'clock anchor on the Financial News Network, and then come Saturday nights, the ABC affiliate picked it up in Hawaii, as well as a few others. And I became Sonny Ross. So it went from "Hello, everybody. My name is Leonard Rosen. This is the 6 o'clock edition of the Financial News Network" to "Hello, everybody. My name is Sonny Ross, and welcome to another edition of World Championship Wrestling." It was really strange.
How was Lars Anderson to deal with? Because I understand he was the top star from that promotion and the booker.
Well, he was definitely the booker. He was one of the most intense people I've ever met in my life. In real life, he was a heel. So it was easy for, well, his real name is Larry Heinemi, but Lars was was it was easy for Lars to put on a pair of wrestling trunks and boots and just make the transition because it wasn't much of a transition. He was an interesting cat for sure.
As far as him being a heel in real life, in what way was he difficult with payoffs? Was he rude? How was your experience with him?
In those days, I'm not sure. I didn't say, I'm just saying, I'm not sure anybody ever got paid. So when you talk about payoffs, I don't know. I don't know if the local guys got paid. I remember Ric Flair came out to Hawaii. They gave him a first class ticket. I interviewed him, and I'm not sure Rick ever got paid on that gig or not. They did run I will give them credit though. They ran a couple of big promotion. Hot Summer Night one, which I was not involved in. That was when Ripper Collins had the gig, and then Hot Summer Night two, which I did it. So I was not only the announcer, I was also the MC, and I did the color commentary. You know, I was kind of a, I did it. I kind of did it all.
So who was on that Hot Summer Night 2 card? Because I noticed when you search Polynesian Pro Wrestling, that's one of the things that pops up about it. So I guess that was one of the biggest shows ever from that company.
Yeah, no, well, they did two of them. The first one was bigger than the second one, but you know, they had the Russians, Nikolai Volkov, and you know, Dusty Rhodes was on that, Flair was on it, Abdullah the Butcher, um, um, Bruiser Brody. Matter of fact, I'm the last person to do an interview with Bruiser Brody before he died in Puerto Rico. So the NWA did they brought some real big talent for those events for sure.
What was Bruiser Brody like in your experience with him? I
I
imagine he would have been paid, one of the guys that got paid.
Yeah, he got paid. Well, when I say guys didn't get paid, I'm talking about the local guys. Um, Bruiser Brody was cool with me. He was totally cool. I like Bruiser Brody a lot. I interviewed him. I had lunch with him. I actually he asked me to go out to get a couple of beers after the show, and I thought, you know what, this is kind of a rough group. I think I'll take a pass on that. But I liked him a lot. You know, the word on the street is that he was difficult to work with, but that wasn't my experience. I'll tell you who was really difficult to work with was the Sheik, not the Iron Sheik, but the Sheik. There were two Sheiks, and we were doing that Hot Summer Night gig, and Mark Lewin was there. Remember Mark Lewin?
Yeah, 100%. He was
Oh,
always
oh,
Kevin
oh,
Sullivan.
oh, oh. So
Yeah.
Mark Lewin was an interesting talent. Anyways, uh, we were filming the signing of the contracts, you know, the quote contracts, and the sheik pulls something out, and I was right there with the microphone, you know, and you know the banter going back and forth. The sheik took something out of his trunks and like snapped it and threw fire, and it freaked me out. I mean, I didn't like that at all. But he did the same thing, which was, you know, part of his, part of his thing at the Hot Summer Night deal. Now, visualize this: we're in the Aloha Stadium, where all the big football games, the University of Hawaii play, and so forth. It's kind of an iconic place, and he threw this fire at somebody, and somehow the Sheik was chasing the guy up into the stands. I don't even remember who the other wrestler was. And it was getting out of control, literally. And there was about a 40-foot platform with ABC cameras up at the top, and the Sheik started to climb the scaffold. So I went over to the HPD, Hawaii Police Department. I said, "Hey, you know what? Uh, this is not part of the program here." And they got him out of there. And the police officer came over to me and he said, "I think you should probably leave," because they weren't too happy with that. And I got the hell out of there. And that's the last gig I ever did. And I'll tell you what, the other thing that was really weird. Now understand something. I lived in Hawaii. These are my, these are my neighbors, my friends. I lived in Hawaii. And the Sonny Ross thing, because I did everything under the moniker stage name of Sonny Ross. It never occurred to me that people didn't know me as Leonard Rosen, that's who I am. So when they started the Hot Summer Nights program, I mean, there were thousands of people at the stadium, and they announced my name. I came from the dugout, and there were two rings in the center of the football field. One was a cage with barbed wire, sounds lovely, and the other is just a wrestling ring. And it's a long walk from the dugout to the 50-yard line. And the crowd started cheering, Sonny, Sonny, Sonny. And I gotta be honest with you, it kind of freaked me out. That whole night was really weird. And that was the last gig I did, but there was, oh my God, the stories. People ask me all the time about, the backstage stories of professional wrestling. And obviously I can only talk about my own experience. But I saw more fights in the locker room and in bars than I ever really saw in the ring.
Who would have been involved in some of those behind the scenes fights? Was
Well,
Haku around at that time?
well, Lars Anderson, we were doing a gig in Maui. They had the Sheik, Lars Anderson, um, Mark Lewin, a few other guys. I don't remember. And and so this was after the matches, and everything went fine. And actually, they pulled a pretty good house that night. And we were in this Hawaiian restaurant with Liam Ivia and Ati So'o. And Lars and Ati started having words and went outside. And Lars ended up at the Maui Memorial Hospital for about 2 months. He nearly swallowed his tongue. Um, I guess Ati and a few of his friends jumped Lars in the parking lot. That happened. That actually happened.
How were the fans as far as fan violence? Because you always hear those Hawaiian Samoan types love to fight.
Never saw any of that. No, I never saw any of that. The fans were cool, actually. The Hawaii fans, back in the day when Russ Francis had the promotion, that was a real thriving promotion. And so he built up that culture, part of the Hawaii culture of professional wrestling. When Liam Ivia took it over, um, I mean, it just it lacked panache. The problem is everybody was a heel. There was no baby face. And when I look back on those times, I realize you can't really run a promotion where everybody is a heel. Everybody is the bad guy. There's no balance there. And I think that people saw that because you can only create so much drama between one guy screaming at another guy screaming. But I remember back in the days, and this is a name I doubt if you remember, Eddie Sharkey. He used to work for Vern Gagne. Do you
He
remember
trained
Eddie?
the Road Warriors.
Yes. Oh, so you're good. You're good. So
Yeah.
Eddie was a friend of mine. And I remember Eddie coming on. It was before Mean Gene Okerlund. It was a guy by the name of Marty O'Neill. Marty O'Neill was great. Nothing like Mean Gene. He was like the best of the best of the best. But he would come on. Eddie Sharkey was a short guy. He couldn't be more than 5'7" or so, but he was wide. And I remember him doing his interview. Hey, Marty, just want to thank all the fans and appreciate, all the support they get. And that was his thing. So now you had the good of the world against the evil, and Eddie was pretty good at it. And yeah, he created his own gym in Minneapolis. I remember that, and I remember he did train the Hawk and Animal. He did. I mean, he trained a a bunch of other guys too.
Yeah, a lot of them, the successful wrestlers from Minneapolis, were trained by him. There's a fan on here that wants to know what the attendance was for that Aloha Stadium event. I heard it was 1,900 for the second one and 12,500 for the first, but you weren't there for the first one, I don't think.
I was not there for the first one. I wouldn't doubt the 12,500. The 1,900, I don't think is an accurate number. If I were to guess, I probably would say it was 4 or 5,000 people. It was definitely a smaller event for sure.
Al wants to know if you had any interaction with Ripper Collins.
I did. I did. Ripper was a trip. Ripper was a trip. I remember the Ripper was an old school Ed Francis guy. So I remember a match that he had with I think it was Superfly Tui, who was the Polynesian champ at that time. There was no wrestling in that match at all. It was just two guys pounding at each other's forehead with all the scar tissue. I've never seen so much blood in all my life. And they literally were on their knees just pounding each other. But Ripper was cool. Yeah, Ripper was all right. Ripper knew his look for a local promotion that had potential. Ripper and Dunbar, which was his partner at the time, they made a pretty good. They made a pretty good team, actually. I like Ripper. I thought Ripper was cool. He was always cool with me, and I think a lot of the talent respected him.
Tom would like to know how tough Mark Lewin was, in your opinion.
Way tougher than you could ever imagine. Mark Lewin was a monster. Physically, he was a monster. And Mark Lewin used to work out at World Gym when I used to work out there also. I mean, nobody messed with Mark Lewin, and that's a fact. I mean, Mark Lewin, what you see on TV about Mark Lewin is exactly what he is. He was a big, rough, and so was Don Morocco. Don Morocco was a really tough guy too. But I would say Mark Lewin was it's got to rank up there as one of the toughest guys I ever met in my life.
As far as Leah Maivia, what was she like? Obviously, the first real woman's promoter that had a company that everyone was aware of.
Leah was a strange person. Now, I had a good relationship with Leah. Um, After I left the promotion, I think she was deported back to Samoa. I actually went to her daughter or granddaughter's wedding. Lee was tough. Lee was very tough. That's a tough wrestling family that they came from. Leah was very tough, and she didn't take any shit from anyone. That is for sure. How smart she was, how clever she was in terms of running the promotion, that would be, another conversation. But that was a tough Samoan family. Make no mistake. When you walked into Leah's office, you were in her world, and she made you aware of that.
Did you ever meet The Rock when he was a kid?
Did not, did not. I would have liked to, but that didn't happen. I will tell you a funny thing with Macho Man Randy Savage. He came out to do a couple of matches. Him and Jerry Lawler came out. Matter of fact, Jerry Lawler did a match at the Neil Blaisdell Center where his manager, which was his wife, Jerry was put somebody up on the top turnbuckle, and the guy was going to come down with a knee over Jerry Lawler's wife. But there was a screw up, and he came down and broke her nose. That was gnarly. Um, but I remember doing an interview interviewing Randy Macho Man Savage, and he couldn't remember my name. for whatever reason. And I asked him a question, and he looked at me and says, "Oh, Mr. Announcer Man, oh yeah, always asking the tough questions. Always asking well, the Macho Man is the one who answers and asks the questions." Never forget that. It was so funny. But he was cool.
Someone has a question about Polynesian pro wrestling getting threatened by the Crockett's or something, or you guys threatening the Crockett's due to something to do with Lars Anderson. Do you recall any of this?
Oh, I was right there. I remember all of it. Your viewership knows a lot. You have a very educated viewership. Um, there was a dispute with Lars and Jim Crockett for sure. And Lars and a few other wrestlers were indicted, a federal indictment for conspiracy and wire fraud or something like that. It was a big deal. And Lars, he had to appear in federal court and defend himself. And um, he was actually found not guilty.
Interesting. How often were they running when you were part of the company?
Every week. Every week. The local they had a great gig. The local ABC affiliate picked it up. So we did matches at the Neil Blaisdell Center. And if we didn't do a match that week, we would do an in studio interview, something like that. But there was exposure every Saturday night. Every Saturday night, 10 p.m. Hello, everybody. My name is Sonny Ross. Welcome to Polynesian Professional Wrestling. And yeah, so that was the deal. Every Sunday night.
As far as High Chief Peter Maivia, he was passed away by the time you joined the company. I think he died in '82.
He died in '82, and I started in '83.
So obviously you didn't witness any of his famous fights, but did you hear any stories about how tough he was? There's the famous one where he may or may not have taken out Billy Robinson's eye.
Yeah, I've heard that story, and High Chief Peter Maivia was feared. Make no mistake, he was feared by all the bookers, all the promoters, and certainly all of the talent. I never saw him wrestle. I heard that same story, uh, um, but I cannot confirm that.
Did you ever meet Andre the Giant?
I did. I did. He was a very large man. Not what I mean. He had hands that were. I, I don't even want to say like a catcher's mitt because they're bigger than a catcher's mitt. He was on his way to Japan, and he was going to stop off in Hawaii and do a match, but he hurt his back, and so he didn't wrestle. But I got an opportunity to spend some time with him. I mean, look, this guy drank more alcohol than any human on earth, and it was just constant. I mean, he would have 24 beers, from what I'm told, before a match, and then go out and just drink all night long. So yeah, but he was good. He was all right. He was a different kind of a guy. In some ways, he was humble, and in some ways, he was feared. Most of the guys feared Andre. His sheer mass and size was quite intimidating.
Someone wants to know about the story where Kevin Sullivan allegedly refused to win the title one night due to too many drunken Samoan fans. Did you ever hear about this?
I was there. Kevin's a cool cat. He got that Boston accent, and at that time he was doing this evil devil thing or whatever it may be. And it was so funny. I'll never forget. We did a filming down in Kailua Beach where Mark Lewin and him were coming out of the ocean. like these two scary guys, which they were coming out of the ocean, and they had put seaweed all over their bodies and so forth. And 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 I said, so the shtick was something like and we've been searching the island from North Shore to the South Shore. Can't find Lewin. Can't find the taskmaster. And then I'm at the beach, and they're coming out like they live in the ocean or something. I mean, it was kind of a cool scene. Anyways, I lived about a mile from there, and I had something that they needed to get. They came to my house, and I remember my wife at the time. I said, "I want you to be Kelvin Sullivan. He's the taskmaster," and he had all the paint and I just got to tell you, that's just a funny moment. Getting back to the belt thing, yeah, I think he was intimidated. The Samoan fans can be quite aggressive. That did happen. That actually did happen. Refused it.
Now, you mentioned you saw the guys getting into trouble at the bars, but you didn't necessarily always go. Was there a partying atmosphere in those days amongst the wrestlers?
Well, you have to understand there's two demographics of wrestlers. The first demographic was the local guys, Superfly, Tui, Richie Magnet, Little Kevin. They had the midget matches, Spicy Tomato. So you had that group, but those were people that lived in Hawaii. So they were just living their normal lives, right? It's kind of like going to Las Vegas. Most people who live there don't live on the strip, right? So they're just living their lives. But when the big names came into town, oh yeah, they'd go down to the Lollipop Bar in Waikiki. I mean, these guys, they would just rip the town apart. Absolutely, absolutely.
Did you ever meet Jimmy Superfly Snuka?
Yes, a couple of times. He's cool. I liked him a lot. Isn't he? He's got dementia, or he died, or
He eventually passed away, but he was known to be pretty wild behind the scenes.
watching him jump off that top rope. There isn't anybody who could do it better.
How was Ric Flair? You mentioned he appeared in the territory.
I've known Ric Flair. I'll tell you a funny story. I've known Ric Flair since I was like 20 years old from Minneapolis because that's where I grew up. And he used to go to the same gym that that I went to. And so those were the days when the Road Warriors were just getting started. Like he said, being trained by Eddie Sharkey, his real name Eddie Scheinman. Um, and what was your question again?
Ric Flair, you said
Oh yeah, okay.
you.
So all right, so I'm going to tell you some funny Ric Flair story. Rick is cool. Rick was cool, as long as you gave him first class tickets and a room at a 5-star resort to make him feel important. Rick was cool. My wife, I remarried, and right before we got married, we were dating. So I took my wife to Las Vegas, and who's in the hotel bar lobby but Razor Ramon and Ric Flair. And my wife has heard all the crazy Sonny Ross stories for years from her brother who lived in Hawaii. Everyone's heard about it. But it's one thing to see it. So Ric Flair and Razor Ramon were in the lobby. I says, "Hey, there's Ric Flair." I said, "Here, I'll introduce you." "You don't know Ric Flair." I said, "Oh, really? Oh, really?" And I walked over to him. "Hey, Ric Flair, Sonny. Hey, Sonny Ross. Hey, how are you?" And so forth. And she sat there, and yeah, she couldn't believe it. But Rick was cool. I mean, Rick was quite the talent. I mean, he was a really he had an interesting upbringing. It was Rick and Jimmy Brunzell and Gagne and Rick Rude and And all those guys came from the AWA. I mean, Vern Gagne had quite the talent pool, and Rick was, he he's the man.
Did you ever try to get a job with AWA after your Hawaii thing? I know you were just doing it kind of for fun,
I was
but
doing it for fun, and I don't know if I ever actually collected a paycheck, to tell you the truth. I don't think Lee ever cut me a check. Yeah, Sonny, I'll see you next week or next month. And it didn't matter to me because for me, I was doing it for fun. I mean, I've been in the television business for years as a 6 o'clock anchor on a serious, cable television network, financial news network. So, I did it just for the fun and for the life experience. And I did it for a few years until that hot summer night uh, fiasco where the Hawaii Police Department said you probably should leave now. And they escorted me out to my car. And that, seriously, that was that.
oh, I could imagine.
Oh yeah, no, listen, yeah, that could have gotten ugly for sure.
Was that the craziest moment that you saw when the police are like, "You got to get out of here," or they're going to basically mob you, or was there something
Well,
worse than that?
there it's kind of hard to say because it would the actual footage of the sheet going up. And you understand, these are civilians, these are fans, right? They're not part of it. And he's like throwing, fire and so forth. And so, it was quite alarming. And I was the only adult in the room. You know what I mean? I was the only adult in the room. There wasn't like a production guy that said, "Hey, you can't do that," or "This is going off script," or whatever. So I was the one, at least in my eyes, to keep some kind of sanity. Um, um, Associated with it. Yeah, that was pretty. Yeah, that was pretty gnarly. The fight that Lars got jumped, that wasn't good either. I remember. I remember. Superfly Tui, who um, who was the Polynesian champ. Leah would not let him take his belt home with him. Now, he was a champ for like a long time. They would not let him take his belt home for whatever the reason. I don't know. One day, Superfly Tui just like lost it at the Neil Blaisdell because he was going to take the belt and go home with it. And she, "Oh, you can't take the belt, Tui. It's my belt." And I don't know. Maybe they didn't have the money to buy another belt in case they got lost or something. I don't know. But they're look. These are not MIT grads. Can we get that really clear? I mean, right? I mean, this is a subculture of a subculture, right? So you've got the mainstream professional wrestling, the WWE, then you got Jim Crockett, then you've got the Hawaii thing going. So it's a subculture of a subculture of a subculture and had its own identity for sure.
Yeah, do you think a lot of people say that the wrestlers in the old days kind of changed now? They sign a lot of college athletes and they're paid to train in WWE and the territories are pretty much gone. But in the old days, a lot of these guys really couldn't get a normal job. These were the people in society that really the only job they could do was wrestling because they were so crazy. Would you say that was true with some of them?
Well, I would say that's true with a lot of them. You have wrestling families like the Hart family out of Canada. Those are real athletes. And what was the family down in Texas? The Von Erichs. Those are real athletes. They took the business, as professional wrestling as a profession and serious. But yeah, and if you go back to the Vern Gagne days, the Crusher, the Bruiser, Nick Bockwinkel, Lars Anderson. Although Lars he did have a degree. He graduated college, so I'll give him that. And he wrestled in St. Cloud State, so he was a real wrestler. But yeah, these were uh, a rough group, right? I mean, professional wrestling overall has gone through so many different transformations and evolutionary, the evolution, over the years has been quite remarkable. Look, WWE is now part of, with the UFC. I mean, who'd ever think of such a thing? Vern Gagne never wanted to, he didn't believe in pay TV. He wanted to keep his territories. And that, back in those days, that's how it was. You had a territory and you didn't go into another guy's territory. I mean, that's just the way that worked. And, you'd pay a vig, if one of your guys, was going to wrestle in there, in another territory. And they kept it that way. Florida was a big territory. Atlanta was a big territory. The days of Bruno Sammartino back in New York, that was their territory. Vern Gagne, that was a very, very successful territory for many, many years. So in Kansas City also. So, but when cable came in, the WWF at that time literally put everybody out of business, put Vern Gagne right out of business. It was like almost overnight.
And you talk about WWE coming in, I believe around the time of that second Aloha Stadium show. Wasn't that around the time WWE came to Hawaii for the first time?
Yes. Oh, you're good. You're good. You remember stuff. That is true. That is absolutely true.
What was the reactions to people like Lars Anderson of that happening?
Livid, out of their minds, right? Because they didn't recognize any territorial boundaries at all. And they drew a pretty good crowd. If I remember correctly, that they did it at the Neil Blaisdell, and I think the Neil Blaisdell holds, God, I don't remember, 12, 14,000 people, something like that. Yeah, I mean, they sold it out. Look, it was, the talent pool was pretty strong.
Someone wants to know if you ever met Gino Hernandez.
No, never met Gino. But I met Gene Okerlund. Is that close enough?
Sure, how was he? He was
Oh,
probably the best at what you did.
okay. So a lot of these guys were big drinkers. Like a lot of them were. I'd say most of them were, and a lot of them back in those days, they were on all kinds of pain medications and steroids and so forth. So when you combine pain medication, steroids, alcohol, and who they actually are, and you roll it all up into a ball, that's a pretty wild group. Gene Okerlund could, it's hard to believe, but he would go drink for drink with Andre the Giant. You asked Ric Flair about Gene Okerlund. Gene Okerlund could pound him down, and this was one of the sweetest, nicest, funniest, most talented uh, people in the business. The only other person I would say that had some limited access to was Bobby Heenan, the best of the best of the best. Took a bump like nobody could take it. Was a real gentleman behind the behind the scenes. I mean, there was he was. When I look back on the people that I had, contact with, I would say Dusty Rhodes was probably the best talent ever. Old school, old school. Dusty Rhodes was the best. And I would say Gene Okerlund is the one who built most of those. He built Hulk Hogan. He built. I mean, he got it. He got it. He knew what he was doing.
What do you think of wrestling today being totally scripted, even the announcer stuff 100% scripted?
I haven't watched it in years. Doesn't interest me. It's like this. It's this corporate product that's all packaged, put together. Does not interest me in the slightest. So I don't know what it is today. I don't even know who the who the players are. I will say this. Though, I will say this. We live in San Diego, and my son is at the car wash one day, and he's waiting for to go through. And here's a big Rolls Royce that came into the car wash, and there was John Cena. And my son at the time was like maybe 18, 19 years old, and and he said, "Hey, champ, I hear you're the man." And John Cena looked at him. He said, "I'm not the man. I'm a man." He was very humble. And I never had any interaction with him, but um, that was his way of breaking character, and I respect him for that. And he took pictures with my kid, and that was totally cool.
Who were some of the more arrogant wrestlers to deal with? You mentioned Lars was one of them, and the Sheik wasn't exactly a pleasure. But was there any others that you were like, oh God, I got to interview this guy again?
Well, Mark Lewin was difficult to work with. Um, Lars Anderson was interesting to work with. And like I said earlier in our conversation, I know Bruiser Brody got a lot of heat for for being difficult to work with. Bruiser Brody was an independent, and he will always be an independent, right? That was his thing, and he made that very clear to everybody. But no, he was cool with me. You know, I, most of the guys were cool. They understood it was my job to put them over. So I was, pretty much the last guy that they would, have any friction with.
There's a fan on here that what do you think about the physical damages that pro wrestling has on the wrestlers' bodies? We know it's scripted, but it does take a toll. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I do. Because it's scripted. So this is something that I think is very important for the fans to realize. Because it's scripted does not mean these guys don't take a freaking beating. Mark my words on that. I mean, they take a beating. The last time I saw Lars, he could hardly walk. I mean, look at Hulk Hogan. He's had like hip replacements and so forth. These guys' bodies are just beat up. And they did that to make a living for themselves and their families, and I get that. But you can't take those kinds of bumps 6 nights a week over a period of years without having your body just completely fall apart. Yeah, I mean, their ankles and their knees and their backs and their shoulders and their necks. Yeah, brutal, brutal. I mean, it's not like these guys are landing like on a soft mat or a trampoline. It's plywood. It's 2 sheets of plywood with a wrestling mat over. Yeah, the plywood does have some give, but you're still coming down hard. And if you in the best case scenario, you're coming down and you're breaking your fall in the best case. But it doesn't always, shake out that way. I mean, I saw, like I mentioned, I saw Jerry Lawler's wife get her nose broken. That was the manager at the time. I mean, blood everywhere. I mean, it was gnarly. Like I say, it's tough. I don't know how these guys do it. To tell you the truth. I mean, even today. I mean, again, I haven't watched it, but you still taking bumps. I mean, whether you know it's coming or not, you're still taking bumps. But back in the day, it was different. It's like Vern Gagne was more, AWA was more technical wrestling, where down south was wrestling, right? There's a big difference. I remember Vern Gagne's days, you couldn't jump off the top rope. You could only jump off the second turnbuckle. So he was aware at the time that if the talent gets hurt, it's going to cost them. But yeah, these guys take a beating, and most of them, I think if you were to ask them, most of them are in bad shape. I mean, most of them. Matter of fact, I'm trying to think. I don't know anyone today that is like walking vertical.
At least today, the modern wrestlers make a lot. The lowest paid guys in WWE are making 250 grand a year, which is a lot more than the lower paid guys made in the territory days, as you said, the locals.
$50,
Yeah.
$50 a night.
Someone wants to know if you have any memories of Jim Duggan, who started in Hawaii.
Ho! Jim Duggan was a sweetheart of a guy. One other guy could have a 2x4, that's his prop, and with the US flag. And yeah, Jim Duggan was a tough guy. Jim Duggan, make no mistake, Jim Duggan was a tough guy and a really, really nice guy. I worked with him a couple of times. And he was doing he was on his way to Japan. A lot of the guys would stop in Hawaii for a gig on the way to Japan, at least a lot of the independent guys at that time. And Hacksaw was one of those guys. Yeah, I liked him a lot. He was very cool.
Speaking of Japan, I saw on that Hot Summer Nights 2 card, they had both the Great Muta and Antonio Inoki
Yes.
on that card. Inoki just passed away and the Great Muta just retired. Any memories of them?
I didn't work with either one of them, but um, Antonio Inoki was the most powerful figure in Japan in pro wrestling. And if you did well with Antonio Inoki, if you really had a good match and Inoki was sitting ringside, you would go up to him and he would slap your face several times. And that was your way of getting respect from him. But I didn't work with him.
Very interesting. And what do you do now?
Well, I was in the television business for many years. I hosted, as I said, the Financial News Network. And then I had a program on USA Network called the Leonard Rosen Show, which was kind of like a Oprah or Phil Donahue kind of show at the time. And then got into real estate investing and sold my business in November, and doing interviews like this now. That's what I'm doing.
Any advice for wrestling announcers that might be watching this coming up in the business?
You know, that's actually a really good question. No one has ever asked me that. What I would do is I would start with character development. You have to develop your own character. Nobody wants just an announcer. Case in point, look at Bruce Buffer. Bruce Buffer is like taking a shot at Jack Daniels, where his brother Michael Buffer is like drinking a smooth champagne from France. And so you have to establish who you are. You have to establish your character. And then you have to be able to sell that character, whatever that character was. In my time, I was super tan. I had long hair. I had gold chains with the shirt wide open and a double-breasted sport coat, and that was my look. That was my on stage persona. So you have to first start with that. And then from there, you have to create some type of a announcer's voice, whatever that may be, your own thing. It doesn't have to be like the radio announcer voice, like "Hello, everybody." No, it can be whatever you want it to be. And then, you have to dress for the part, whatever that image is that you want. and just go to some local promotions and talk to them. It won't be that hard in order to get a gig. And if you're good, people will notice you and you'll climb up through the ranks.
In your talk show life, did you deal with many celebrities?
No, the focus was sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the destruction of property. That's what people wanted back in those days. And so anything that was had to do with something that was controversial or that would get us ratings, that's who we interviewed. But they weren't famous personalities. They were interesting people with. I mean, I remember a time we interviewed these psychics. This was really weird. We were doing it out of Sacramento, is where we filmed. We had these three psychics that came in, and they claim that they can find lost bodies and lost people and all kinds of things. And we had this lady that came on, and I just got a weird vibe from her. And we have the studio audience, there's several hundred people there, and she said she can levitate a table. I said, really? I'm a skeptic. Can you levitate a table? Like, give me a break. So we brought out a table from the back room and we put it on the set. And we had our producer, director, me, and the psychic at the table. And this table, I don't know how much it weighed, a big dining room table, I made a couple 100 pounds. And we all put our hands on top of the table. And she started with talking in different languages and so forth. And I'm telling you, that table lifted. And I'm a skeptic, believe me. I am a skeptic. And that table lifted, freaked me out. I said, okay, let's cut to commercial.
Very interesting, because we do cover some paranormal stuff on this channel too. So
Really?
yeah, no. So that's interesting as a skeptic that
That
you.
happened. And after that happened, I actually remember going into the restroom and throwing up. That happened. And it was almost like remember, it's our table under our controlled environment. She brought no props. There was nothing. All she did, and then I tried to push down on it. It was almost like there was a force underneath. I don't care if anybody believes me about that at all. I have the tape of it. I'll send you the tape. I'll send you the tape.
Yeah,
You watch for it yourself. It was weird.
I'd love to see that. Rick wants to know who you consider the greatest wrestling announcer of all time. Obviously, I think you already alluded that Mean
Oh,
Gene might be up there.
Gene Okerlund. There wasn't anybody that could compare with Gene Okerlund. Mean Gene had the personality. He knew his craft. He was good at it. Um, the guy before him that was pretty good, and again, I'm going back to the AWA, and that would be Marty O'Neill. Marty O'Neill was pretty good, but nothing like Mean Gene. But I think the greatest on-air talent, I would say, in a couple of different eras, but the greatest on-air talent was Bobby the Brain Heenan. I mean, in my mind, there's absolutely no question. The wrestler that gave, I think, the best interview, Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah, you mentioned that you like Dusty Rhodes. Do you have any stories about him?
Dusty Rhodes was pretty much what you see was what he was. He was very nice. He's very humble, very nice guy. Wore a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and jeans. That's who he was. He was highly respected by everybody in the business, and he cut the best promo of anybody I've ever seen. You put him in any kind of situation, whatever the scenario may be, and he'll cut the best. He'll cut an awful lot of people say Gordon Soley. Okay, I don't know who, but not me. Gordon Soley, he's not even in the same universe as Gene Oberlin.
Yeah, I think the Florida people, but I don't. He was more of a like a play-by-play announcer than
Yeah,
he's known for that more than the interviewing. Although I did hear he was a big drinker, much like Gene.
it's just part of the culture. It just is what it is. It's just part of. It's kind of like the old saying: if you hang around with five broke guys, you'll be broke. You hang around with five drinkers, you're going to drink. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, Ken Patera even said it was like a culture of drunks back then because they would drive these long distances
They
every
drive
night.
3, 4, 500 miles. They'd get like an old hearse or a limousine, and they pack everybody in and stop and get potato chips and cokes and so forth. Yeah, right. Ken Patera. There's an interesting cat. But
Did you ever meet him? He's hilarious.
I never met Ken, but he was good friends with one of my friends. I never met him. His brother was, I think, the defensive coach for the Minnesota Vikings. His brother was, a hell of an athlete. No, Ken Patera at one point was a hell of an athlete. Make no mistake.
Yeah, but as it's hard for people to understand now, but in those days, because they had to drive so long, they would get drunk to make the time pass.
Oh yeah, listen, people think, fans think that these guys are like limousine driving, Rolex wearing, I live in the best part of town at the top of the hill. That's not the way it is. Now, in those days, Hulk Hogan was. Make no mistake. Hulk Hogan was sent by private jet everywhere. Um, but the vast majority of the guys, they drove, especially if they're independents, right? If they were independent guys and going from one territory to another, you had the Kansas City territory, you had the Florida territory, the Atlanta territory, and so forth. Then you had the whole Canadian territory and New Zealand territory. But these guys would be in the car for hours upon hours. Not a great life, right? And yeah, big
No,
drinkers. Yeah, that was a
no,
culture.
yeah, no cell phones either, or
Oh, no
barely
cell
see your
phones. Yeah,
family.
right. And there was guys that they would make their money and send it back home, and there's guys that just pissed it away. And at the end of the 3 or 4 month tour, they had to keep it going because they spent their money. It's a very tough business. I remember Lars Anderson told me he had a group of wrestlers. These are in the old days. I think it was maybe after his shtick with Gagne or before. He was doing some small wrestling promotions in northern Minnesota. And I remember him saying he had 6 guys in the van and they only had enough money to buy 5 cheeseburgers at McDonald's.
Yeah, and the other thing, I don't know if you noticed this, but it seems like in the old days, like you were considered more one of the boys. The more you cheated on your wife, the more you drank, the more screwed up you could be and still wrestle the next night. That would like put your standing higher
That's
amongst the
interesting. No,
wrestlers.
that's really interesting that you say that because I've never thought of it in those ways. Um, but I wouldn't disagree with that. That's a very astute observation. Yeah, if you want to be one of the boys, then you have to be one of the boys. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little different now, and probably good in some ways. But the people that would have made it in those days today probably wouldn't have jobs as wrestlers today just because
Yeah, right.
of the hiring practices.
Right.
So, is there any social media you have that you would encourage fans to look up?
In terms of wrestling?
As in terms of, well, anything online, or I don't know if you have any personal social media where fans can follow you and see
Oh, you
what
can
you're up
follow me at Leonard Rosen 99 at on Instagram. Sometimes I'll put some wrestling stuff up. I'll probably mention this. Maybe if you could send me a screenshot, I'll put it up on my Instagram. Um, yeah, I'm in the semi-retire mode right now. Playing a lot of golf. That's what I'm doing these days. But yeah, you want to contact me through Leonard Rosen 99 at Instagram.
And as we close it up here, how is LA these days? You always hear mixed things about living there.
Well, I'm in San Diego.
Oh, okay,
Um,
San Diego.
okay, so there's a big difference. Um, LA is not a place that I frequent. It's not my thing. I live in San Diego, which is a quiet beach town essentially. San Diego's great, but LA, I don't even know what LA is, to tell you the truth.
Very good. Well, I'm glad you don't have to deal with the craziness that people say goes on there,
Yeah,
unless
no,
you're super
nothing,
rich.
nothing crazy in my life. But I will say this: I've done some pretty extraordinary things in my life. From a business perspective and some other things that I've done. But I think when I look back on my life, and I'm 71 years old, when I look back on my life, I think I would have to say that those years that I was involved in professional wrestling, even though I didn't make any money doing it, were the most fun years of my life. That was a real blast.
I can imagine those were the glory days of wrestling. I would say for
80s
me, the
wrestling, right? Old school 80s wrestling.
excellent. Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans. Thank you very much. It was very interesting hearing your stories.
Well, I want to thank all the fans for watching for sure, and I appreciate the questions. And maybe as time goes on, and I think of some more stories and so forth, we can do it again. But I appreciate you participating in this, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates.